This time on Engine Masters, light makes might. You know that making your car weigh less makes it go faster. But do lightweight engine components make more power? We're here to find out. It should come as no surprise to you that I bench race engines in my head all the time. And when I'm shopping for dream stuff, I always think to myself, should I get that 38-pound crankshaft instead of the 42? Should I get the aluminum connecting rods instead of the steel? Should I get the tiny damper? Should I get the aluminum flywheel instead of the heavy steel one? Well, that's what we're here to find out. Do lightweight engine components actually make more power? Do they help the engine rev faster? Well, I couldn't really build entire engines with different components to figure this out. So let me tell you exactly how we're gonna do it. We're gonna use this small block Chevy, and I'll tell you all about what that is. And we're gonna start with this 10-pound harmonic balancer. Then we're gonna change it to this 1-pound aluminum drive hub. It's meant for circle track cars, just to be able to run accessories and things. It has no damping ability, and it's super lightweight. Next up, we're gonna take the steel flywheel and the big dyno drive hub that weighs 44 pounds, and we're gonna change it up for this 2-pound little drive hub. And then we're gonna run the engine and find out, does it actually make more power to ditch all that weight? And that's a big, big chunk of weight. Probably more than you can actually eliminate in your reciprocating assembly in your engine, but it's gonna give you a scale to see how much this is really worth it. And to find out, we're gonna accelerate this engine at 2 different rates on the dyno. 300 RPM per second and 600 RPM per second, and compare the two. We'll explain more about that once I sit down with the Steves. So, what is the engine that we're using for this big test? This is a Westech mill that's been around, and it's got 10,000 dyno pulls on it. We really are impressed with the reliability of this thing. It is a Dart SHP 372 cubic inch small block Chevy. The whole short block you can buy from Dart as is. They run fantastic. Up in the top end, we've got AFR, Airflow Research 195 street heads. We have an Edelbrock dual plane RPM air gap intake manifold. We got a 750 Holley XP. The camshaft in this thing is from Comp Cams. It's a hydraulic roller with solid roller lifters on it. You can see that trick in an earlier episode of Engine Masters. And its duration is 242 at 50 on the intake. So this thing should make neighborhood of 500 horsepower. We're gonna put it on the dyno right now with these heavy parts on it, and second, change it up to the light stuff and see what happens. All right, we got our 377 on the dyno for the baseline. You've tested this thing 10,000 times.
A few.
So there's gonna be no surprises here.
No.
The thing I want to describe to the audience at this point is, how are we gonna tell the difference in power between the heavy components and the lightweight components? It's more than just straight horsepower on the curve.
It's going to show up in one of two ways, acceleration rate or horsepower. And since we have a controlled acceleration rate, we're going to look at a power difference. So what I'm going to do is accelerate the engine at 2 different RPMs, 300 and 600 RPM per second.
Like we just threw together the COVID 350 and the 56
Right.
Chevy. How fast did that thing tack in the car?
Oh man, it had the aluminum flywheel and it was just zinged up there like crazy. But I mean, you've done drag racing, right? And you've done land speed racing. And it's kind of an analogy what we're doing right here. I mean, land speed racing, weight of the car is not as much of a factor as in drag racing. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, you're not overcoming inertia, which is what we're talking about here, but even more specifically about land speed racing versus drag racing. In land speed, like at 250 miles an hour, I'll gain 300 RPM in 30 seconds, whereas in drag racing, the engine's going, yip, yip, you know, it's revving fast. That's basically what we're gonna duplicate on the dyno here. Is 300 RPM per second is a slower than realistic acceleration rate, and 600 is, I don't even know what the scale is in a real car.
I think even 600 is slower than first gear in a Pro Stock car.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's something that extreme.
But 600 is actually a pretty quick acceleration rate. That's actually a common test acceleration rate for comp eliminator Pro Stock style engines.
Okay, so what we're gonna see when you go in the room is, first you're gonna run it at 300 RPM per second, then you'll reestablish your temperatures and everything, and then you'll run it at 600, and we'll look at both plots.
Exactly.
Cool, we're ready.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah, don't blow it up, Steve.
That's happened enough today.
This is it. This is our baseline with a regular weight flywheel and a normal harmonic balancer. So that was our first test at an acceleration rate of 300 RPM per second, and the power numbers are 500.4 horsepower at 6,600 RPM, and it made 466.2 pound-feet of torque at 4,500 RPM. And now we're gonna find out how that changes when we accelerate it twice as fast at 600 RPM per second. It's always interesting how much power it loses when you do that.
It was more than I would have expected, I think,
like it,
just
yeah.
judging by the numbers flashing by. But I like the higher acceleration rate for the sound of that thing zinging up, but
Yeah.
I think I like the power numbers at the slower rate
I know.
better.
You always like the best power number regardless
Yes.
of whether it's realistic in the actual
Oh,
world.
yeah, who cares about that?
That was 600 RPM per second, and our peak numbers have changed. Now we're looking at 457.7 pound-feet of torque at 4,300 RPM, and the horsepower dropped to 488.3 at 6,500 RPM. Now, the data part of the program. Right here, we've got the black line representing 300 RPM per second acceleration rate, which would be the standard that you normally see on the show. The red line is 600 RPM per second. So what are you seeing?
I see that it takes a whole lot more power to accelerate something quickly. Like I said, it's going to show it in one of two ways, either an acceleration rate if you're not controlling it, or power if you are. So we actually went from 300 to 600, and the power went way down. And basically what that tells us is this is the engine's inability to accelerate its own mass. The faster you try to accelerate, the more power loss there actually is shown.
You?
Yeah. I'm surprised by how much it is, really. I've never done this specific test and looked at it, and
It's big.
It's big, yeah, it's really big.
Okay, very cool. So let's go change it from Cadillac mode to bicycle mode by removing the flywheel and the damper.
Oh, you're going to love what I did for bicycle mode.
I can't wait to see it.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Great.
This is gonna be simple. Let's go.
All right. Whoa, Steve-O. I was expecting maybe an aluminum flywheel or something, but you just have a drive hub.
Well,
Where'd you get that?
we wanted to reduce the weight, so
That's
On-
reducing it.
on my old race boat, we had these PTOs. It's an 1 3/8 10 spline. And so thinking about this test, I thought, let's try and make it as light as possible. So I really wouldn't recommend doing this as a normal practice, but for one dyno session, you know, a few pulls, I think we're okay with it. It basically has no dampening at all. You may want to take a look at this thing. It's
And the center
it's
of
nothing
mass
but a
is-
steel hub. There is no center mass. We basically removed the whole drive hub, you know, the drive plate,
Yeah.
the whole flywheel. We've removed everything. All there is splines in the back of the crank.
Well, that's gonna be good.
Yeah.
Good thinking.
Now we've got the lightweight components on the engine, and we're gonna go for the base 300 RPM per second pull.
Now, how can you tell that relay likes it?
I know, because he's playing with it. How come it just makes the engine so much more wicked?
It just does. It
It's
sounds
cool.
way better, too.
Yeah.
Dude.
Makes good power.
Yeah, it does.
That's cool.
Wow.
That's really cool.
That's a heck of a lot.
Thing is, it's 44 pounds off the back.
I know, but
Yeah.
to me it seemed like it was better at the hit too.
Yeah, it
which
seemed like it was.
static right there.
That was 300 RPM per second, our baseline with the lightweight components on the engine, and we made 478.9 pound-feet of torque at 4,400 RPM and 516.2 horsepower at 6,600 RPM. Next up, the faster run, 600 RPM per second with the lightweight components. So on our faster 600 RPM per second pull, we made 474.7 pound-feet of torque at 4,600 RPM and 511.4 horsepower at 6,500.
So 300 light?
Yeah, the first thing we should look at is the test we just did at 300 RPM per second with the lightweight components, or should I say the non-existent components?
That makes them light.
Right. They are vapor.
Yeah, it's...
So there came up quite a bit. New power peak for this engine though, 516.2. It's never been there before, at least not with this particular combo.
Right.
Now this is gonna be the comparison of the heavyweight parts versus the super lightweight parts. Wow, train tracks, absolute, the same except for right off the hit.
Yep.
Wow, that's amazing. So if it wasn't obvious, the red lines are with the full weight flywheel and drive plate, 44 pounds worth, and with a 10-pound damper versus the components that weigh a couple pounds each.
I'm glad you decided to put this kind of like on the test schedule.
Yeah.
We've done this before, just kind of like with the acceleration rate stuff, but we've never taken the time to put that small of a balancer, or hub, I should say, on it, and actually really try and lighten the components. And taking all that flywheel stuff off, I mean, it sounded like a sprint car when I touched the
I know, it was
throttle.
great.
Yeah. It sounded like a mini top fueler the way you could whack it. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, it was great. So I did the math on the difference between these two. We lost 12.7 pound-feet and 15.8 horsepower by adding heavyweight parts, or we gained those numbers by going to lightweight
By
parts.
the light ones, yeah.
Yeah, and it looks to me like that's exactly the change within a spec at every point in the curve except for right here. Yeah, that's a big deal.
It's a huge deal.
Yeah.
Where do you find that?
Amazing. All right, let's have a look at 600 light versus 600 heavy. Wow.
It's even more.
Even bigger change when you're accelerating the engine faster. It hates it even more to have to carry all that dead weight. Wow. So I did the math on this also. The change is far greater. So at 300 RPM per second, the loss with the heavier parts was 12.7 pound-feet. It's 17 with the faster acceleration rate. And the horsepower changes from 15.8 to 23.
Wow.
So the faster you accelerate the engine, the worse it gets when you've got heavy components in the rotating and reciprocating assembly.
I mean, there's sections in here that are almost 30 horsepower.
That's crazy.
Isn't it? Yeah, like I say, we've done this before, but I've never seen gains like that. I've never worked that hard to get the weight off.
What's really interesting to me is not only that we showed the difference in power, but that we showed the faster you accelerate the engine, the worse it gets.
Yes, yes.
That's really my key takeaway at this point.
In the car, it's going to vary a lot more than that because you're going to be accelerating sometimes a lot faster than 600 RPM per second.
Yeah, I think for sure. And the other thing that's interesting is when we saw you playing with the engine before it was running, you're doing the wah-bah, wah-bah.
Yeah.
It also comes down much faster.
You ought to see what happens when I hit the off switch.
It just
Ding.
off.
Half a rotation, it's boom.
Yeah,
It's
just
done.
dead.
It starts easier, I swear.
Yeah. No, it did.
Yeah.
When you started, I was thinking through that, and it's because when it first starts and it's only got a couple cylinders hitting, it no longer has to overcome all of that stuff to get running. It just bam!
At first, I thought this can't be. But then I shut it off, and it was literally, I could barely touch the start button. Boom, boom, and it was running.
Totally.
So all of
Yeah.
it,
It's wild.
You know, something else I was thinking was in the car, it would make more difference in first gear than it would in high gear.
Right, because of
Faster
acceleration rate. But let's get into the real world downsides of it. First of all, we took 44 pounds off the flywheel alone. In the real world with a small block Chevy, steel flywheel is gonna be about 30, 32, and aluminum's gonna be about 15.
Okay.
So you're taking 15 pounds off.
Okay.
So, and then with the front damper, I don't know what the weight is on those, but you could go from a 6.5 to an 8-inch, and that's a difference. So I guess what I'm saying is that the scale in the real world for an engine like this is going to be smaller.
Sure. I mean, we were demonstrating what happens, but by the time you're done with a good piston and a lighter connecting rod and buying the 60-pound big block crank or the 43-pound small block crank, by the time you're done picking away, you've knocked 40 pounds out of it. You can take 30, 20 pounds out of the crankshaft in a lot of cases.
Right.
Which, don't forget, is also just weight off the car.
Yeah.
And weight off the nose of the car. So yeah, I think you're gonna have to go further to get this kind of gain on this engine in the real world than we actually did on the dyno. Because the other thing is, you don't even want to run this thing over and over because it's got no damping in the front whatsoever.
I don't like the idea of having no dampener in the front. I'm perfectly fine with like a little 6-incher, as long as it has some sort of ability elastomer or something there to dampen it. But with nothing there, I've seen timing chains break because of no dampening. There's a reason sprint cars run gear drives.
Okay.
Because they have no dampening, and it will break timing chains. I've seen it happen with blower motors. So a lot of this stuff, you know, the jerking back and forth, crankshaft manufacturers will tell you to use the lightest balancer possible, typically is what they'll tell you, as long as it's a harmonic balancer. Crankshaft manufacturers don't like drive hubs like this.
No, of course not.
No. So, but it's just,
I get that.
like I say, it's just demonstration purposes.
I think it's also cause and effect. If you don't run a hub, the crankshaft is accelerating both directions more quickly than it would otherwise, which is also why it's breaking those timing sets.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
With more weight on it, it goes, oh, instead of, hava! And so it's changing direction much more slowly.
Again, that's what crankshafts hate, is they hate being at one speed and changing to another.
Right. Here's the other thing, though, and we were worried about this recently. We just put an aluminum flywheel on my 56 Chevy, and I was worried because if you have a dump truck, you don't want a light flywheel. You need the stored energy of a big, heavy flywheel. If you have a rock crawling Jeep and you want to chug along at 300 RPM crawling rocks, you don't want a light flywheel. You want the heaviest one that you can get.
Yeah.
But for the drag car that was lightweight with a 411 in the back and a stick, I went ahead and got the 15-pound flywheel, and I think it's helping me for sure.
Oh, yeah.
It's cool. And it does a little bit of that wah-bah, kind of like this does.
You know, I grew up when we were using 50-pound flywheels in 288 cubic inch small blocks.
How did the horse pull that?
Well,
It took him a second.
we had 350 or 400 of them with the tunnel ram, so. But you know, it's a 3,800-pound 56 Chevy or, you know, something, and with 288 cubic inches, it was not going to leave with an aluminum flywheel. So that stored energy is accurate when you talk about that.
Yeah, I guess I make that point really specifically so that you don't realize, hey, let me just get rid of my flywheel and go. You know what it makes me realize about automatic transmissions too, is that when you do drag race converters that get smaller and smaller, that's also an advantage. And when you have lockup converters and big, heavy billet units, like in a 4L80 that weigh a ton, that's also a downside.
You know, anything you're rotating takes power to do it. The smaller the circumference or the diameter distance from center, the less affected the engine is by that. So the flywheel that's 14 inches in diameter is going to be a huge deal. If it's something located, a drill mark that's located 1.5 inches off center of the crankshaft, isn't going to matter much.
Well, I mean, if you're talking about the car, it doesn't end at the end of the crankshaft when you're going down the road or down the track, because you're
Drive
also
shaft,
turning the
wheels and
gears in the transmission, the main shaft, the counter shaft, all of that stuff. So, yeah.
Yep. I bet this makes a bigger difference on a big block with a big Hankin stroke than it does on a little small block, too.
It absolutely does.
And it makes more difference with higher RPM also.
Yep, all those things.
Like, ding.
Got us thinking.
Man, this is really cool. So once again, more answers, more questions, more data, all the stuff that you get every time on
Engine Masters.
Do we have the hydraulic history?
Hydraulic, only doing the manual.
Did you hear him when he said that?
Yeah.
He looked at you like you'd insulted him by saying hydraulic. Hydraulic? Not on my 372, you won't.
Yeah.
Did you see me?
Can you just
Like a young whippersnapper.
can you just do it one more time for close up?